All right, cool. We'll get started. All right, thank you everyone. I know you had some choice and you could have gone to some other sessions, so I won't waste your time, I promise. We're going to talk about, you can check off the bingo buzzwords, right? We hit AI, so you can check that off and you can put in your trip report you learned about AI or something like that. I was a cracker, hacker, pirate, and then I got into identity after, so I don't really trust anybody in the way how I view everything, including our identity systems. I just always see it in an adversarial way. And many of you that, I see a lot of familiar faces, if you listen to some of my talks at Gartner, or even at Identiverse last year, or other venues, I'm always talking about identity security. And how, yeah, we can say it's IAM or identity management, but it's really identity security now. And fraudsters are here. Fraudsters don't care if you're an identity person, a network person. They don't care. They don't care if you're the CMO, the CEO. They'll find a way in, whether they call your help desk and try and get in, or they use some other forms of scams. Actually, KnowBe4 just put out a report, and they said something like a whopping 90% of all breaches and attacks there's some kind of scam involved with it. And it's no different with what we're seeing with AI. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about what we are seeing in the dark web, some of the research that me and my team have put together. And then I put together a QR code at the end that you can snap for the full report on what we've been seeing in the dark web. And this is to help you with your business cases and really start to prepare yourself for really what we're going to see is a big change in the identity security world. All right, so let's get started. This works. This is not working, so I'm going to use the arrows. All right, I'm going to start with a story. This is your landlord. She makes so much money off of you that this is what she can do all day. Isn't that nice? Right? And this is you. You just maybe were traveling overseas. You went to maybe a new Identiverse that's happening in Amsterdam. And you flew here from North America. You're jet lagged. You're tired. It was a great day. You get a message on your phone. It's from her. You owe her money. You always owe her money. You log into your bank. You use your Face ID. It was using a passkey. It was using all this great stuff. You wire her the money, close it down, you go to bed, or you go partying, whatever you want to do, right? Well, you just fell victim to what's called authorized push payments fraud, right? This is a type of scam that weaponizes your identity. If you paid attention to what I said very quickly, you logged into your account. You used all the stuff that we're talking about at this conference, from passkeys to IDV, and when you set up your account. And maybe they're using all this very powerful device identity stuff that's tapping into the secure element to use that cryptographic binding and using behavioral stuff. It knew you were traveling, but didn't see that as weird, and it let the transaction go through. That's what bad actors are doing now. They know about MFA, they know about fraud detection, and they know about IDV. They know that all of these things are broken, and they know that you have these in different teams. And so they know that if they can trick you and trick the user into authenticating, they can weaponize it against you. This example is being further fueled by GenAI, and that's what we're going to talk about today, and I've got some examples. But I'll dissect this a little more after we go through some of the examples, but this is effectively the flow. They didn't have to attack you directly as the victim, thus triggering behavioral alarms, security alarms, authentication issues. They went after your landlord. And I'll talk about how GenAI is making that even easier, especially from someone like me who played around with this stuff. It's a lot easier to get all that different type of information, and we'll talk about it. So last year I gave a talk. I see some familiar faces in here, and you were in my talk last year. And some of it's like a broken record, but we actually have dark web screenshots and stuff I'll show today. This is the presentation I gave last year, right? How attackers are using ChatGPT and how you can respond with intelligent identity security. Frankly, the recommendations we gave at the end still hold today, except now we actually have the justification, the data points from what we're seeing in the dark web to say you need to do this now effectively. So being a former Gartner analyst, they burnt in my brain the ability to do these predictions, which we get wrong a lot of the times. Humans suck at future predictions. We do. Statistically, we're bad at predicting future. But, and here's another reason why. This we put together February last year, right? That attackers are going to have access to these services, they're going to monetize them, and it's not just for code, it's also for vulnerabilities, reconnaissance, right? Who is the IT team at this particular organization? What's their software stack that they're using? What vulnerabilities do they have in that software stack? So all of those things they can have just like you would use with that usability with ChatGPT, but in a malicious service. We were totally wrong with that prediction because we said by 2024. Just a month or so after I gave that presentation, in the summer of last year, FraudGPT, WormGPT, EvilGPT, they all started coming out, right? So we were totally wrong. We were off by like 6 months. But honestly, I have to tell you, this stuff is moving way faster than I've ever seen. I'm sure a lot of you feel the same way. And with the bad actors, it's moving even faster. Why? Well, as I said, they don't care about who you are. They don't care about what your title is. They don't care if you're a network person, an identity person, you're using this version, that version. It doesn't matter to them. They will try anything and everything to get in, and they can fail, and they can try, and they can fail, and they can try. So if you look at the top, this is basically, they're faster than us to adopt new technologies. They've been playing around with deepfakes for a while, and they're only just getting better and better at it, right? SIM swaps, APP fraud, they can share what works and what doesn't work. They're working way better as a community. I've got some shots of Telegram and just the comms that are going on between everybody. They share what works, they share what doesn't work, and they share how to improve. They're doing a better job than us as a community in sharing that information. They don't have to worry about compliance or standards like we do, right? We have that red tape, and there's some good reasons for that, but remember that they don't. They can try something, and it doesn't have to adhere to GDPR or CCPA. Who cares? They can try something else and fail. And they only need to be right once. And we're going to talk about the 3 Vs towards the end. They can actually do A/B testing, right? So they can split your population of consumers or users, and they can try different techniques. And if they see something that works in A, they can then shut down B and then put everything into A if they want to. They're doing A/B testing. It's crazy. And these screenshots, that's WormGPT. This one is just some sharing that we found on the dark web. It's of, I think, British Airways, and it was just someone that found that they were using Akamai, and they were looking at what CAPTCHA system they were using. So this is the reconnaissance information that they're sharing with each other. So they can say, if you're going to devise a campaign against a certain airline or a certain organization, these are the types of vulnerabilities that this particular software product has, and you can go ahead and use that, and you can use these LLMs to effectively have rocket fuel. But before we dive into that, what I want to really impart on many of you is it helps to understand who these adversaries are, right? It helps understand getting in their mindset, right? Because that will help you when you're devising the countermeasures, when you devise your approaches, right? All while balancing user experience and security. So they all overlap, but there's 3 general levels of speciality when you look at these fraudsters and these hackers and all sorts. There's the folks that do the supply chain tooling. So they're really, usually they're pretty good coders. They're using like best practice software engineering practices. They're using their skills to go out there, look at these vulnerabilities, and then try to build these tools that they will eventually monetize, which we'll get to in a moment. And I'll talk about what they do specifically, but there's a whole raft of things they can do. There's the users themselves, whether they're fraud tools or other types of tools. So they may not be good coders. They can do some scripting, but they will just use some of these tools, wrap them up, and then they'll use some information they can get from these LLMs to then target various organizations, vulnerabilities, you name it. And then, of course, there's monetization. Everyone thinks with ransomware, they're just locking up your data, for example, and then getting the money back. No, they're stealing your data, selling it. They're also locking your data and getting the money from the keys to decrypt your data. So there's a lot of monetization going on, and actually there was a good article out there that was saying a lot of good people like us that are disgruntled are going on and joining these things to make some extra money on the side. So don't do that. Don't do that. It's a supply chain, so going with those personas now, understanding what it looks like from a very high level. They find the vulnerabilities, right? They then develop different types of tools. And by the way, they also use like legitimate tools too. So they'll use vendors like BugCrowd and all sorts that even though they may find bugs, and they can join bug bounty programs too because they can double dip, they know that there's the reality when it comes to your environments that there's time to patch. So they know even though you might have a 0-day vulnerability, they've got time where that's pretty hot, and they can charge a lot for those typically. But it's a supply chain. They'll go find the vulnerabilities, develop the tools, and then they come up with automation, because nowadays it's not about necessarily hitting one. It's very easy to automate. T-Mobile at RSA gave a fantastic presentation of what all the fraud that they were seeing inside and outside their accounts. And they were saying the number one game changer with all of this stuff has been the ability to automate and scale, right? Much like how digital business has been us to scale and reach different populations around the globe, it's the same thing with these people as well. And then, of course, they monetize everything and go from there. This is the kind of collaboration they have, the kind of communications they have. Telegram's a big area where you can see a lot of chatter going on. This one here is advertising for WormGPT. So did you know, here's a little infomercial for WormGPT, you can do business email compromise, you can write malware, you can do phishing, there's no boundaries. Like one crazy thing, if you went to authenticate, they talked about how Icelandic banks never really had to deal with phishing. But now with ChatGPT and these types of services, you could take an English phishing campaign and translate it into Icelandic, right? So there's that scale and that global reach that these tools can give attackers, even novice attackers. So we're seeing a lot of this stuff going on. Pricing, what does it actually look like? Again, we predicted this last year that they would come out with pricing. So if you want to get access to WormGPT, 1 month membership is 110 euros. You can get lifetime membership. You can pay for the source code. You can do all of this. So it's just in like how ChatGPT is like product-led growth. These people have product-led growth with their malicious tools. Pretty cool, right? All right. And by the way, if you want to take pictures, I would just, you'll get a lot of this stuff in the report at the end. So take a picture of the QR code at the end. So I could go on and on. The report has a lot more, but I'm going to start to dive into the actual attacks themselves. Okay, if you fall asleep, don't fall asleep on this slide. This is the most important slide in the presentation. I will not lie. If you've seen some of my presentations, I always come back to a version of this slide because I believe in it. We have to think about the identity as a full life cycle. Can't just think about like IDV and onboarding and authentication and your directories. Yes, we do. There's time where we have to focus on those elements, but we have to think about that full life cycle. This is how attackers think. Attackers aren't thinking necessarily about one aspect. They do when they want to focus in, but they look at the full picture across all the different touch points and channels. That's why, with MGM, they went after the call center, right? Because they're like looking for a way to get in. They'll find any way in, as I mentioned earlier. So let's touch on this, and then I've got a few slides towards the end that will dive into some of these areas. So the first one, onboarding, right? Typically, that's the process of converting a stranger to someone who is known. And we know we do IDV there. What are the kinds of attacks that we're seeing that are being kind of propelled further with GenAI? Of course, there's registration API attacks. There's a lot of stuff going on with APIs. APIs are still that thing that we've put out to the world because it helps with our business partners, with third parties. If you're an airline, you want Expedia to pick you up, you want other providers to pick you up. We need those. Those are machines, right? But there's a lot of holes, and it is a whack-a-mole game with APIs, right? And we'll talk a bit about that. We'll dive into that more. Deepfakes. Deepfakes are an arms race, right? IDV vendors are doing, a pretty good job at trying to keep up with the different types of techniques. But honestly, we're only just getting started with deepfake technology, right? And bad actors have been playing around with this stuff for years. It was 2017 when that Obama deepfake came out, and that was, it was pretty good at the time. Now they're getting very good at it and very sophisticated, right? And they're putting a lot behind it. So that's going to make it harder to do onboarding. And then, of course, there's the good old site vulnerabilities. And again, this isn't an exhaustive list, but we'll talk about how those are being amplified with GenAI. Then we move into the second phase, which is now that you've onboarded somebody, hopefully successfully, and hopefully it's the right person, we want to create their account now. So we're trying to build their account, create that relationship with us. This is typically where we might see new account fraud or synthetic fraud. So I've used these GenAI tools to amass a large amount of data about you. I have enough information to open up a new account with a new provider, maybe it's a credit card or whatever it might be, and I can impersonate you, right? And you don't even know that that account exists. So that's new account fraud. We'll talk about how it's even easier to do new account fraud, to do things like entity link analysis. They can find relationships. They can do all sorts of crazy things. Deepfakes as well they can use here. And then, of course, API and other IAM vulnerabilities. I wrote a blog a couple months ago on IAM resilience and talking about how, again, a lot of IAM providers were born out of ITSM. Right? IAM is really about enabling the right access to for the right reasons, the right resources, enabling the right business outcomes. Didn't really take into account adversaries, right? And that's why we're having problems industry-wide. That's what gave birth to ITDR. When I was at Gartner, we were like, wait a minute, we have fraud with consumer stuff, but we don't really have anything in the enterprises, and we have XDR and endpoint security, but nothing's really looking at identity activity, at user behavior analytics. But there were still a lot of gaps. And it's because IAM was born to just give people the right access for the right reasons, right? And it has to change and get into security, and that's another reason why. Ongoing access. So we have a little cycle here, because typically, once I know who you are and I set up your account, generally you're not having to do an IDV or register every single time you want to access your bank account. As an example, you're just authenticating, right? So ideally, once you've already set up, you spend a lot of time here. And we've probably been to tons of sessions that talk about MFA, talk about passkeys and all that. All that's all good stuff. But what are the different types of attacks we're seeing? Again, API attacks. There's attacks specifically on the protocols or the software vulnerabilities themselves. That's always a never-changing game. There's deepfakes if you're using different types of biometrics. So if it's voice authentication, some financial institutions stopped accepting voice printing on call centers and so on. MFA fatigue, right? Bombarding your users with a lot of out-of-band requests. We know that that's been a problem. SIM swapping, for sure. So if I can get access to your SIM, I can do an attack, get the text message, and I can register my attacker device associated to your account. Now I can authenticate into your stuff. So lots of stuff on SIM swapping there. Transaction fraud. We talked about APP fraud and compromised credentials. Huge monetized databases of compromised credentials that are out there. We've all known of this, and you can buy access to those. And those LLMs will also help give you just kind of snippets of what you can buy effectively. Deprovisioning we're not going to cover, but if you're an anarchist, maybe you go in and delete stuff. I don't know. But really, account recovery, that one is certainly an issue. I was talking to one of my friends who's a Gartner analyst who covers fraud, and he mostly covered financial institutions because they were always calling him about fraud. And he said, it was the other week, he said 70% of my engagements were actually workforce enterprises because now they're looking at like fraud and IDV tech to start to put into their help desk to help with password reset, right? To get it to be more secure because attackers are going after the account recovery process, right? They want to get in that way. So we have to tighten that up. So it is like a flavor of onboarding. It should be onboarding light, really, where, again, the same attacks can happen. They're going to use deepfakes, social engineering, SIM swapping, and other types of vulnerabilities. All right, let's dive in. I know we don't have a lot of time, and there's a few more slides I want to get through, and I'll leave you with the report. So I'm going to just do a deep dive, or not a deep dive, but I'll dive in on a couple of those things on that life cycle. Deepfakes. So there are tools like 11 Labs, Synthesia, Lumen 5, and a lot of these are legitimate tools that you can use. You can go right now in the lobby, get a snippet. Even if you're recording me right now, you have enough like samples of me right now to easily do a deepfake on me. Easily, with any of those tools. And those are legit tools, right? So pretty insane. And I won't go through the stats, but we're already seeing a huge increase on all these types of attacks. And we know this is going to happen during registration, account access, and as we talked about, account reset. But generally, it'll be account takeovers, and then they'll either go and do exfiltration of data, access and escalation, and recon. And this is a screenshot as well of a place where you can buy lots of ID cards. I just moved from Canada to the US, and then I bought a house and moved again. And I can't tell you how easy it would have been for me to, because I had to go into UPS to do my change of address, or USPS, or not UPS, USPS, and I could have easily used a fake ID. The poor guy that was standing at the USPS office, long line behind him of probably disgruntled people trying to get packages to wherever, and I show up with my little ID card, and I'm like, I could have been anybody. And I could have changed David Mahdi's address to somewhere else, and suddenly I'm not receiving mail anymore, right? And I could have done it with one of these ID cards that I could have bought for 20 bucks, right? He's not looking at the secure print. He wasn't doing electronic validation on anything. He wasn't checking my biometrics. There's none of that. It's very easy. And I won't even get started about birth certificates, because I could steal anybody's passport here while not stealing your passport directly. I just get your birth certificate, and I attach my fingerprints and my face to your new passport, and your passport's legit. So this is a whole other area that I love decentralized identity, but we got a whole raft of problems we got to solve before we can truly realize the beauty of it. All right, APIs. I talked about APIs a little bit. I'm going to hit you really hard on this. Eric Wallstrom, Gartner analyst, he's actually roaming the hallways here. Please don't assault him. This was his stat. 83% of HTTP traffic is actually APIs. The machines are already here. Don't get me started on non-human identities. This stage is a non-human identity. It's machine identity, all right? There's different flavors of machines. APIs are machines. So as I mentioned, APIs, you saw it across the entire identity lifecycle. You're using APIs. When humans interact with your mobile apps, your web apps, they're APIs that are actually doing the communication, right? And so we have to protect those. But the problem is that there's a lot of challenges with APIs, from discovery to who actually owns it in your organization. Is it dev? Is it IM? Is it cyber? So we've got a lot of stuff we have to do there in terms of API security, and we're getting there. But what we're seeing is there's a lot of focus on these registration APIs, in particular CAPTCHA methods, that kind of stuff. So in the report, take a look at what we're seeing there. Authentication APIs, so I talked about the vulnerabilities with the endpoints themselves. These are very easy for them to scale, these attacks. All these machine attacks, they don't involve tricking a human. They can blast these out and try and fail and try and fail. And if they're successful, they can share that information with others and go from there. And of course, transaction APIs. All right. So I'm going to revisit this from the story I told you. Now, thinking of that identity lifecycle and some of those techniques I talked about, I don't need to go after, let's just say this is David as the victim. I go after David's landlord, and I conduct the ATO on her. Here's what I can do with GenAI. I don't really know how to code, but I know how to get on the dark web because I know how to use the Onion browser, right? And I got on there, and I'm using these tools. I can look in an area at houses that are actually for rent. I can then get information on the transactions of when those houses were sold and everything else. And then I can go and find out names associated to that address. And I can eventually find out who the landlord is, and I could probably find out who also the renter is at a given period of time. And I can use these tools to help me get that identity information and help me, frankly, do like link analysis and find those relationships. I can then also find out if I have the landlord's information, right? And I can create a table. And I can then see various landlords in a certain area, what banks they use, right? And then from what banks they use, I can then also use these tools to find out what vulnerabilities those banks may have with software stacks they're using, if it's call center issues, whatever, right? I then can make another filter that says these are the 3 institutions that map to these 3 landlords that I can then go after. Then from there, I can devise my ATO attack, maybe do a SIM swap, let's just say, because say this one bank relies on SMS. Attack her, get to you, and I can go from there, right? And so what all of this means now is that there's going to be a lot more volume of these attacks, a lot more velocity because they can try different ones, and there's going to be a lot more variety. All right, so we're just going to wrap up here. My QR code is not on there, but I have it on me. These are the recommendations. Definitely use phishing, but start to think more about behavior. Identity is now identity security. And start to look for more of these tools because we need to use GenAI either in admin time, but definitely on the threat ITDR side to help us accelerate these things further. Thank you.